I'm going to be talking to Dr. Holly Caggiano, who is a postdoctoral fellow at Princeton University, about a recent article she wrote called Build Back Better's Big Challenge, Human Behavior. So welcome to the interview, Holly.
Thank you so much for having me. Excited to be here.
Look, this is a very interesting argument. Maybe you could just give us an overview of your article, please.
Right, great. So this was an opinion published in Scientific American based off some of my graduate work, but kind of the whole field of environmental behavior and what we know about environmental decision making. And in thinking about the Build Back Better Act that just passed through the House, it offers a lot of incentives for energy efficient technology upgrades. And some of the ones specifically that we're interested in are heat pumps, to move away from natural gas in houses, and electric vehicles. Specifically, we know that those are going to be extremely important for an energy transition on the end use electrification side. Right, so we also know from this body of literature in environmental psychology and sociology that financial incentives are great. They definitely can help move along a transition, but often aren't enough to move the needle on decision-making processes, which can seem very counterintuitive to people. Obviously, money kind of seems like that obstacle when you're thinking about making a choice, purchasing a new car, whether you're going to go electric or not. Maybe that new shiny EV just has too high of a price tag. But there's also all of these other sociocultural factors that we have to think about in implementing these programs.
What are a couple of the socio-cultural factors that influence adoption of, say, an electric vehicle or a heat pump?
So one thing that I was thinking about a lot in writing this article is a phenomenon out of social psychology called the status quo bias, that people have this interest in keeping things the way that they are, whether that's totally conscious or not. As human beings, can be hesitant about making a change that we aren't exactly sure how it's going to work out. And so there's that bias that we all hold of kind of sticking to what we know, maybe what we've grown up with, what feels normal or right to us. So I think that's a big barrier to overcome. Also culturally, kind of sticking within the norm. People want to generally conform to what they feel is the social norm. What others in their kind of peer groups or lifestyle groups are doing, what they're adopting. And so those are kind of two barriers that I think we'll need to overcome to really allow for widespread adoption of these kinds of technologies.
Now, Holly, in my energy and climate journalism, I often use A.E. Rogers' technology adoption curve. So we've got innovators on the left side, and then we move to early adopters, and then early majority adopters, then late majority adopters, and then laggards. Right. And that seems to me to be, it's been a very useful kind of curve for me to explain where we're at in the energy transition with various technologies. For instance, we could say with EVs, we're maybe now, approaching early majority adoption. It's really getting some traction. Heat pumps, we're not quite there yet. Maybe we're still with early adopters, even innovators. Is that a useful way of framing this conversation from your point of view?
I think it's absolutely a useful way of framing the conversation, but the challenge that we face as far as an energy transition is just the speed at which we need this to happen. So maybe that curve holds, and I think plenty of studies have looked at who tends to adopt what kind of technology when, but just the total market share of EVs needs to increase so much. I think the Princeton net zero report that does this modeling of the different pathways through which we could reach net zero emissions says that by 2050 we're going to need 300 million new EVs and 130 million homes with heat pumps. So I think the real the speed at implementing this is the real challenge.
So from your point of view, the question is not that we're going to go up, that adoption will proceed up that curve as it always seems to when there's a transition. The question is, how do we accelerate that transition? Because we have the climate crisis imperative and we need to do that. So what kind of messaging should policymakers and be talking about to help consumers and businesses overcome some of these biases and these barriers to adoption?
Right. Well, I think one thing that I'll add to the speed of the transition that we also need is equity to do this in a way that's equitable. I think that will also increase the speed of the transition, but also to get these technologies to people who otherwise wouldn't be able to afford them. A lot of those in that innovator category are high income earners, who can afford to take risks, right? So building on that with messaging, I think we really need a lot of trust building. In kind of the government agencies implementing this transition. I think that applies kind of across the board right now, that we could use more trust in institutions. And specifically with energy and utilities, there are some good reasons for people in the US to have distrust. What comes to mind for me, something that I've been thinking about is the deregulation of the energy sector at the household level. Specifically, I'm based in New Jersey at Princeton, but also New Jersey and New York, both deregulated. We've seen scams with these energy service providers that compete for customers buying electricity and end up kind of doing a bait and switch, reeling people in, promising low prices, promising free upgrades, things like Google Nest thermostats, smart home technology, and then kind of all of a sudden raising the price. And specifically, we see that with low-income households, elderly households, these kind of door-to-door campaigns. So I think kind of as part of that broader movement towards deregulation to encourage competition, we've also brought in some bad actors and discouraged trust. So being able to kind of rebuild that and really encourage people to understand that these changes are good for them, that they're in their best interests, that they're not being convinced to upgrade to a heat pump that actually, in 2 years is going to be outdated and they should have waited and they should have never done it. That they're making decisions that are technologically sound and right for their households.
Now, Holly, I'm curious if you have an opinion about the role of political narrative in this, because this is about how we talk about the transition. And I find President Biden's language very interesting, because I think he understands that we're in an energy transition, and it is about climate, that's great, but it's also about transitioning to new forms of energy and really restructuring the economy. He talks about the creation of jobs, competing against China in areas like electric vehicles and batteries and wind and solar, those kinds of. Does that new political narrative help consumers to build trust, gain confidence that they should get on board with that?
That's my hope. I think you're completely right about, we need everybody in on this transition. And right now we see all of these issues, people are not looking kind of 10 years down the road at their finances more so than they're looking at what's in their bank account today. And we see this problem with gas prices right now in the US, right? Well, and everywhere. But so the political narratives are absolutely important. I think one thing that's interesting about the rebates in the Build Back Better bill are the increased amounts for manufactured in the US, US made batteries to kind of encourage that level of manufacturing and innovation. So I think it's important. I think we have to see how it plays out. But absolutely, I think could be a good strategy.
Are you seeing any signs that policymakers and the folks who are designing these programs around EV rebates or programs to promote heat pumps are taking into account the kinds of human decision science that you're talking about?
I think plenty of them are. I think kind of one of the challenges, and in looking at such a wide ranging program like the Build Back Better bill, is like there's only so much language that they can include in that bill that's going to apply blanket across the board. That it's going to depend on state and local regulators to implement these programs and kind of in the ways that they know are best for the communities that they serve. And I think that's particularly true in the US right now. Urban populations versus rural populations, there's all kinds of different challenges that people face that aren't just going to be the same across the board. So I think one thing that we can look to That's been hopeful as we've seen some good examples of implementing this, decision-making science and human behavior at the energy use level in things like, increasing energy efficiency in the home outside of these kind of large-scale purchases, just with end use behaviors. Specifically, I don't know if you've ever had an energy bill that says, you're doing better than the efficient homes in your household. Congratulations, green smiley face. Those programs have been found to be pretty effective, not at a whole lot of reductions individually, but aggregated. If each household saving 2%, that really does rack up in terms of emissions.
Well, great, Holly, really appreciate your insights here. Thank you very much for this.
Thank you so much.